May I now request Mr. Pawar to introduce Mr. Sapnesh Lalla, our keynote speaker, and invite him for his keynote speech on AI changes everything. Over to you, sir.
I remember reading that line that language most shows a man, speak that I may see thee. So I leave it for Sapnesh to be introduced by what he's going to talk about, but just to say that he's very much a part of building NIIT, has been there for 3 decades. Was he started the whole new business model for our learning Fortune 1000 companies and has been deeply engaged in the whole area of learning science, how we think, how we learn, and then the role of technology. But more than that, he's worked with these large corporations to understand their learning needs and has built business models that deal with, as I said, among the Fortune 1000 companies, the top in many categories, and how to solve their talent problems using newer methods of learning. So, Sapnesh, over to you.
Thanks, Raji, and thanks everyone who's joined. I think this amazing new edition of the EdTech conference at NU. Welcome all of you. I think I've been asked to discuss how AI can change everything. I can tell you with great confidence that AI will change everything. How you will use it to change everything is really up to you and up to all of us. Now, I can't see all of you, so I can't tell how you guys are thinking. But what I can say over the last 2.5 years of work that we have done, especially under the guidance of our Chief Learning Scientist, Dr. Greg Collins, is that there are two key insights that at least we have gained. And I'm sure as you work with AI, you might gain more insights. The two insights that I wanted to share that we have gained and that you might be used readily as you look at solving problems are: one, with Gen AI, you can impersonate anyone, which means you can use Gen AI to play the role of anyone that you can think of. Now that could help you solve many problems. If I could see you and if this was an interactive session, I would have asked you what might be situations where you use Gen AI to impersonate someone who is hard for you to get when you are building your learning programs. One that I wish I always had was a subject matter expert. It was very, very hard for me when I was growing up as an instructional developer to find access to subject matter experts. With Gen AI, you can impersonate subject matter experts. So you should think of what you could do. Another area where I used to have trouble when I was building programs was, how do I build really good role plays? Role plays tend to be really, really important means of training somebody on how to do something. For example, if you're teaching somebody how to sell, or if you're teaching somebody how to buy, or if you're teaching somebody how to give feedback, or if you're teaching soft skills, if you're teaching somebody how to ask a set of questions and what to do with the answers that the person provided. Having that somebody at that point in time becomes really, really important. And I think one of the things we've learned with Gen AI is that you can get Gen AI to impersonate that person. So imagine if you wanted to do a role play where there is a buyer and then there is a seller, and let's say our student is playing the role of a seller. Now, without Gen AI, it's really hard to create a credible interaction between a buyer and a seller. You have to find a buyer, you have to create a situation where the conversation between the buyer and the seller appears credible. And you have to find a method of having someone observe that conversation so that they can provide feedback. And that becomes really, really hard even if you're running an instructor-led training class. In e-learning, it becomes even harder. But with Gen AI and its ability to enable you to impersonate anyone, you can actually do it. So it enables you to do things that you could not do in the past. So that's one key insight that we gained, that with Gen AI, you could impersonate anyone. There is a second key insight that we gained, and this you could think of as a generalization of the first insight. Learning and especially education, as we think of today, even today, or how education has been practiced over the last millennia. The practice of education has been designed around constraints. And let's look at what constraints mean. There is a reason why you have, now I know NU has great student-teacher ratio, sometimes as low as 10 to 12, but you have 12 students to one teacher. Now, why is that? Why couldn't we have one teacher to one student? It's really because there is a constraint on how many teachers we can have. Now, if some of you were elite athletes, you might have 5 or 6 coaches to yourself, but that's super expensive. For an average Joe, even if there was a 1:10, 1:20 teacher-student ratio, they do pretty well. But what if you could remove this constraint of having one teacher instruct 15, 20 students? You could remove that constraint with Gen AI. Another constraint we typically have is, one person writes a book and thousands of people read that book. The book does not change based on the person who's reading it. The book got written by the author. You end up reading the same book. Same thing is true with newspapers. Same thing is true with magazines. Coming closer to training, the same course is designed and delivered to large number of students. Now, imagine if that constraint could go away. Imagine you could create and deliver a course that was designed, developed, and delivered to just one person. Think with Gen AI, you can do that. Now, these are not just the constraints that education and training works with. With e-learning, you could remove the location constraint. But with Gen AI, you can remove a whole multitude of constraints that plague education and can design interactions that do not are not hindered by constraints, but take advantage of the technology to deliver learning interventions that really, really create value. Now, there is a famous 2 sigma problem that Bloom talked about. And Bloom said that in terms of learning outcomes could be 2 sigma better if there was individualized coaching that was available to every student, as compared to one student being one of several who got the same instruction. So just the move from being one of several to just the one person getting coached by an expert instructor, there would be a 2 sigma change in learning outcomes. With AI, you can achieve that at scale. You could create an expert coach for everyone who needs it. Heck, instead of one coach, you could create 5 coaches. Like, you might know tennis players who have a mental wellness coach, a physical fitness coach, a serving coach, a volleying coach, a return coach. Like that, you could think of creating learning experiences that really, really help a student better different parts of who they are so that they are able to achieve outcomes when they matter. So, with those 2 outcomes, with those 2 insights, with just those 2 insights, we are able to imagine a number of different ways in which we can make learning outcomes better. Of course, something that many of you would have looked at is, it becomes a lot easier to build learning content. Now, what if you could build content that made sense only to one person? So let's say you wanted to create a course, again, on how to use Python. Yeah. Let's say you wanted to create a course on how to use Python. Now, the typical way of creating a course would be, you would say, you would pick a class of audience. You could choose to teach Python to find final year students in an engineering program. You could create Python to people who want to become data analysts. You could teach Python to someone who's working in domain, maybe financial services, and wants to do analytics of financial data. You could teach them Python. So you could pick an audience, a class of audience, and then build a generic program for them. Now, if you were to think of how AI can help, one thing that AI can do, like I pointed out, was remove the constraint that causes you to create one course for many. You could create a course for every student. And instead of creating it and making it ready and be available, you could create it on the fly. So the more you think about just these 2 insights, you come up with scenarios where you can dramatically improve the training outcomes that you could create for your students. Now, I could go on and on and on. What could be really, really cool is if you think of constraints that you are facing as founders, whether the constraint is in building learning programs that create great outcomes, whether it is in finding students who might be interested in learning programs. For example, it's possible that for a lot of you, having salespeople who could have interesting conversations about what a student could achieve with your programs could be an interesting constraint. How can AI solve that constraint? For some of you who might be trying to market your programs, figuring out what messages work for which student or which type of student might be an interesting challenge for AI to look at. So, as you think through the journey that a student might take with you, starting from receiving a message from you to participating in your programs, paying for them, consuming your programs, and then maybe for some of them, after consuming their programs, they might be interested in finding jobs for which your programs got them ready. What could AI do to help them find a job? Can AI help them by impersonating an expert recruiter? So there are many areas that I think you could choose. Look, I have more audience to participate in this program. Even these guys got interested in AI. But in any case, where I was going with that was, I think it's really for you to imagine how you can use AI to remove the constraints that you operate in, and how you can use AI to release you from several of these constraints and create interactions, create learning programs, create a business that is dramatically different from what it could be. Thank you.
So, Sapnesh, we have a little time, and I thought maybe I can nudge you a bit to comment on a few things, particularly some of the things we saw at the confluence last week. What comes to you top of mind as something that you hadn't thought of, which somebody presented that they were doing with GenAI?
Something that we had dabbled with, but we had not really thought about was, there were a number of life sciences and pharma companies who are our customers and who participated in Confluence. Almost all pharma companies have one very big constraint. They spend billions of dollars on R&D to come up with a molecule that might help with a disease. So, they spend billions upon billions of dollars to come up with a new drug. Now, most of the times, it's not just one pharma company who's trying to fix a problem. So let's say if it was Ozempic, where Novo Nordisk got the patent for Ozempic, there are many companies who were in that race. Novo Nordisk got to the finish line, completed the trials, got FDA approval to be able to market their drug. Now, once you reach that point where you have approval, they register a patent, and they have what you could call regulatory exclusivity for a short period of time. In that period of time, they have to recover all the money that they spent on R&D and more so that they can get profit. So that's one. So they work in constraints where they have to get the drug launched and in healthcare providers' hands, doctors' hands, as soon as they can, because every minute that they lose where the drug is not with the patient, they are losing money, and that could determine whether their efforts on creating a drug end up being profitable or not. So this period of time where between the drug being ready to launch and being prescribed to patients is a pressure cooker. The more you can compress it, the more you can expand the lifetime or the shelf life of that drug. Now, typically what happens is, and this phase in a pharma company is called commercialization. So it moves from R&D into commercialization of the drug that they have discovered. This phase is fraught with constraints. Constraints being you need experts to be able to create training. And I'm focusing only from the lens of training. I'm not going beyond training. From the point of view of training, this phase is fraught with constraints. You need experts who have worked on the drug, who are intimately aware of the drug, to help you build programs that you could use to train the salespeople, to train the medical experts who are going to talk to doctors who are not salespeople, but are experts who will help doctors understand when to prescribe the drug, how to prescribe the drug, who to prescribe the drug to. You need doctors to understand when to prescribe the drug. You need healthcare providers to figure out how to stock the drug, how to administer the drug to patients. You need patients to understand what are the pros and cons of the drug, what are the side effects of the drugs. You need economic negotiators who negotiate with hospitals on how to position this drug vis-a-vis other alternatives that a healthcare provider might have so that they are able to get the right price for the drug. So there are many roles to train on something which is very complex, very technical in nature. And there are very, very few people who know about this because of obvious reasons. When a drug is in R&D, it is in no one's interest for a lot of people to know about it because it's a secret. And so this has been a process which typically is like a pressure cooker. And several of our customers said that, look, if AI can liberate us from constraints, even constraints of a subject matter expert, or constraints where we can enable our salespeople to practice the conversations that they're likely to have, let's say with doctors or with healthcare providers, that would be of immense value. And they said, what if we started using AI all the way from the time a drug is in R&D to the time it comes out into commercialization, and use AI to train different roles, use AI to train R&D engineers or R&D pharma experts when it's in R&D, to manufacturing, to the commercialization phase, and use that knowledge to be able to train different stakeholders. So that was something which we were dabbling with. It is a key area of interest for our pharma customers, but we felt through discussion that if we were to really apply AI to this problem, we may have a solution that could do a lot of good.
The other thing which we heard a lot, not only this year but to some extent last year as well, which may be very relevant to our participants, is that when we go about planning our business to train, we look at the kind of roles for which we have to train. And I think this shifting nature of work is changing or may make many roles irrelevant. So I think there was a much bigger discussion on skills and micro skills. And so therefore, as against the talent inventory, there was a whole question of skills inventory. We want to throw some light because that starts changing how we should plan our business, how we should chapter. So there were many interesting presentations on that, and I thought you may have insights, which again can be very useful for people planning a business. That are you planning to build programmers, or are you doing something else, which may apply to different roles as they change, or the changing roles.
You're very right, Raji. What became very clear is that there are a lot of roles that will change quite significantly in their content. It's also quite clear that some of the roles may just go away, and they may just not be needed because AI or automation could address those roles. And this has happened in the past, but with AI, it could happen more rapidly. For example, if you were to think of adoption of automobiles, it took many decades for the world to achieve very high adoption of automobiles. A lot of horses went out of business because of that. But if you were to think of roles today and how having a clearer idea of skills that enable a person to do a role uh, could be very, very beneficial. For example, uh, if you were to look at a retail bank, there are many, many retail banks in India. Likewise, many retail banks who have branches all over the world. For example, we work with a number of retail banks in the United States, including Bank of America and Wells Fargo. Likewise, in India, we work with retail banks such as HDFC, ICICI Bank, Axis Bank, and so on and so forth. Now, all of the management in banks are very aware that the number of days in which you will have tellers, or in US, tellers who are manning drive-throughs in banks are numbered. They know that they are numbered, but they don't know how long tellers will last. They know that the number of tellers year on year would go down. They know that the number of branches year on year would go down. Every branch has a staff. Every branch has 5 or 6 people who work at the branch. They all know that the number of people in those branches would go down. Now, the interesting thing is that as you think of career development or career change, there are, just as there are roles that are diminishing in size and volume, there are other roles that are increasing in size and volume. So, for example, for a number of retail banks, the role of a cybersecurity first responder is increasing in size with more and more online transactions. More cyber fraud is likely to take place, and for that, you need a lot more cyber first responders. Now, if you think of it as a problem, you say, okay, it's possible that a lot of tellers will get fired and a lot of cybersecurity first responders will get hired. That's one way of solving that problem. The way that some of our customers, however, are looking at it is to decompose the role of a teller into skills that they might have. For example, a teller will have customer service skills. A teller will be able to look at a customer's account and see what's going on. And a teller might even be able to advise what they should or should not do with the money that they have in the account. A teller will be able to tell if there are suspicious transactions that are going on in the account, because they know how to look up an account. So these are a few skills that a teller has. Now, if you were to think of what are the different skills that a cyber first responder in a bank might have, they will need customer service skills because that's who they need to talk to and help. They will need skills to identify fraudulent activity. They will have to have that nose to see, to figure out what's going on that is not right. They will probably also need technical skills to figure out what might have caused that activity and was that cybercrime. So as you think about it, and I just touched upon a few of the key skills, but if you think about what I was doing here, I was decomposing a role into skills and then trying to see if there were common skills across two different roles. But by doing that, what we can do is, as L&D professionals, is to create a path from a teller to a cybersecurity first responder and create a learning journey for folks who might want a career change from being a teller into a cybersecurity first responder. And that becomes very valuable both for a bank, but also for the guy who is a teller today, where they may have anxiety on their job going away. So there are a number of areas where you can apply the concept of skills and how different skills come together to enable a person to do a role. Uh, in, for example, solving career development problems or solving talent problems where you need to figure out whether to hire lateral new talent versus reskill existing talent to be able to take care of a role that might be surging.
So we have a couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes. So let me just pose one more question, because we talked about the process of designing and delivering learning, and then we talked about the nature of work. So bigger question, I think, for all of us involved in the business is, what does this change mean in terms of building up or retaining a profitability in the business? If many things are going to be done almost free, and if it's going to be possible for more and more people to do these things, including our customers, then what's the way to look at profitability, viability, sustainability with all these changes that are happening? And that's because that's the motive of every business. We have to be sustainable. So in what sense is sustainability going to be in challenge, and what are some of the thoughts to deal with that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, to me, and this is really an adaptation of something, Raji, that you have always said. You've always said that the brand is the residual of an interaction between a person who offers something and a person who consumes something. So it's the residual that's left out after a transaction about a service or a product gets done. My adaptation of that is that profit is the residual of the value that a customer wants to share with the provider of a service or a product. So the more value that a customer sees from a transaction, often the more profit they are able to share with the provider of service. The lower the value, the lower is the profit that a customer allows the provider of the product or a service to retain. I think that in a steady state has been a reasonable equation as I've thought about profit. The higher the value, the higher is the customer's desire or ability to share value as profit with the provider. So it's really dependent on the perception of value in the eyes of the customer, on how much profit they are ready to leave with you. Now, profit is the life and blood of a business. A business without profit for an elongated period of time is not really a business. You can choose to call it whatever else you want to call it, but it's certainly not a business. So now, I think what you are asking is, in this environment that is changing so rapidly, how should we think about profit? How should we figure out how to deal with profit? I would go back to that. Now it's not easy because things are changing so rapidly. There used to be a time when we often had discussions with Shell where they do their planning in 50-year chunks, because when you explore and find an oil field, you spend billions of dollars in drilling, finding oil, pulling oil out of the ground, refining it, building refineries, refining it, and then bringing it to consumers. So that's a 50-year horizon. I think in many businesses, the horizon and the need for a product, the value that a product brings, is shrinking quite dramatically. So I think most businesses can't build business models which are static in nature, even for a year and a half. The needs of customers or clients are going to continuously change. So, for example, I think this might be relevant to folks on in this meeting. Way back, publishers used to contract with authors. The authors would write a book, and the book would be the textbook and the textbook would continue for several years. The textbooks could continue for decades. I remember when I was going to uh, high school, there was a book in physics called by David and Spires, David Spires. We studied it. I went for a reunion after 20 years to my school, and high school kids were still learning from that textbook. Now, I don't think publishers can rely on that business model anymore. Now, that may create nuggets of learning for our friends who are running edtechs, where the way you are delivering programs, where you thought that one program could service thousands upon thousands of students, the days of that might be gone. The days of creating learning materials as an investment might be gone. The days might be where you create learning materials for the student who is likely to show up tomorrow. So you start thinking of creating learning materials just in time. So we'll have to adapt in a very significant way. Now, for many, this might sound strange that I'm going to be an ed tech or I'm going to be a learning company without a catalog. You could have a catalog, but you don't need to have things in inventory. That's what Amazon did. That's what many retailers did, where they took inventory out of the equation. I remember way back, the key differentiator of Dell was that they would start manufacturing the computer when they had the order, as compared to manufacturing lots of them waiting for orders. So a lot of these things would upend business practices and put strains on how we make profit. But I think for founders, it'll be important to think ahead on what changes are likely to happen, how they can use innovation and technology to cause change and to create differentiation, both from a cost perspective as well as a market perspective. And then say, how would they create and sustain profitability? How can they bring value to customers so that the customers will allow them to make money?
Thank you. I think that's been very educative. So we're just on time, maybe a little ahead. So back to you, Neha, and thanks, Sapnesh. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your insightful thoughts.